Hello, this is Peter Falk, and you're listening to the Columbo Files on the Ludic Lounge, hosted by Antonicus Maximus and John Soares.
Hello, good listeners, and welcome to another file that is the Columbo Files. I am your co-host, John Soares, and with me, as always, is my brother from another mother, the man, the myth, the legend, the gluteus to the Maximus, Antonicus Gluteus Maximus the Fourth. Anthony to his friends. Say hi, y'all, to the people, Anthony.
Hi, y'all, to the people.
Every time. I'm going to get you every time.
Every time.
Every time.
So, John, why don't you ask me how I'm feeling?
How are you feeling today, Anthony?
Boy, John, thanks for asking. I feel like this episode of Columbo was properly titled, as this episode is titled Dead Weight.
And boy, is it weighing down my feeling on the show. To be fair, all Columbo is good Columbo, but not all good Columbos are great Columbos.
Hey, that's a great line.
Yeah, and so we got a little bit of a clunker here. It's not the worst thing in the world, but compared to the cannon fire that we got from the first 4 episodes, Dead Weight, unfortunately, is weighed down by a couple things, and we'll get into it. Anthony, who is our murderer this week?
Our murderer this week, John, is Major General Martin Hollister, played by one Eddie Albert. Now, John, Eddie Albert was working in Hollywood all the way back to the year 1936.
That is right. He was one of the first people performing on TV, Anthony. Did you know that?
I did not know that particular fact, John, but it makes a lot of sense.
Prior to doing some TV, he was doing TV stuff before his time in the U.S. military. So he started doing he started out as a trapeze performer, an insurance salesman, a nightclub singer. This was all post 1929 and during the Great Depression. And he also did some stage work as well. He co-hosted a radio show called The Honeymooners, The Grace and Eddie Show, which led to a film contract with Warner Brothers. During his time in the military, he worked as a U.S. Army intelligence officer during the Second World War. And he's also a war hero. He saved a number of Marines and led to the rescue of a bunch of other peoples during the invasion of Tarawa, I believe. So he was on the Pacific Front, so it's very appropriate that he does play a military character.
Well, John, now that you mention that, it's almost as if they shaped this episode kind of around his actual personal life, because a lot of what you just mentioned, it goes into effect on a specific scene where we learn a little bit about the Major General's background in his wartime efforts.
I get the feeling that you're probably right, Anthony, on that one. I didn't find any absolute confirmation on that, but I think considering what his background is, it's a fair assumption to make. He also wrote and performed the first live original teleplay.
Really?
Yeah. So in the early days of TV, most things that were broadcast on television were adaptations of stage plays. So your Shakespeare's and so on. He wrote a teleplay called The Love Nest, which, if my notes are correct, show that it was a romance play, and it was the first original piece of television that wasn't based on something else beforehand. His film debut was in a movie called Brother Rat, which he performed on Broadway, and he reprised his stage role in Brother Rat opposite Ronald Reagan and Reagan's first wife, Jane Wyman.
Now, John, what do you think our former president would have sounded like in that role?
I gotta say, brother, you're one rat. You dirty rat. You slept with my wife, you son of a gun. Nancy.
Thank you, John, as President Reagan, for saving us by not having to put an E by the side of this episode.
No. And Reagan would say son of a gun.
Yeah, he really would have. Now, John, speaking of things that Eddie Albert starred in, a few of his notable ones that I'd like, his IMDb page was as long as your arm is, essentially.
Exactly.
But some of the notable ones that I put, again, notable to me, was he starred in Roman Holiday, as Irving Radovich.
Which he got the Best Supporting Actor nomination for.
Of course he did, because that movie's a classic.
Yes, indeed.
Now, speaking of classics, he starred in Oklahoma.
Knees and toes. Knees and toes.
He was also in a few episodes of Outer Limits, Rawhide, Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Beverly Hillbillies. He also starred in the 1974 version of The Longest Yard, the one that Burt Reynolds starred as, and he played Warden Hazen, which is an excellent movie.
Yes, indeed. Now, do you know what Burt Reynolds used to sound like?
What did he used to sound like, John? That was an actual excellent limited fake Burt Reynolds.
That's all I can do. That's the only thing he had going for him outside of the looks is just that one laugh.
Oh, man, and what a laugh at that. But, John, before
Yes.
we move too much further on from this cast, I want to also say that Eddie Albert, one of his most memorable performances in my eye and in your eye, he played in the 1990s Spider-Man TV animated series as Adrian Toomes, also known as Vulture.
He's the Vulture?
He is the Vulture, John.
The old man who always seemed to be almost on the verge of death, Vulture?
Yes.
Because he always seemed like that version of the Vulture always seemed like he was about to die every episode.
Accurate.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know this guy had a connection to something I really liked.
Yeah.
Now, so before we move on from Eddie Albert, I have some minor things. His notable TV role was in Green Acres. He was on that for about 6 years, from 65 to 71.
That was a good run for it, because Green Acres was the place to be. Dum, 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 dum. It was a show that had plenty. Dum, dum, dum. That's all I have, so John save me. Thank you, this was my limited run.
And what a run it was. You're not that far off, though, because the premise of Green Acres is that the main character, a lawyer, gives up his city job to go live on a farm and raise crops. And wackiness ensues because, they're city folk.
Okay.
It lasted for 6 years, Anthony.
That sure is a premise, John.
Yeah. One more fact. Eddie Albert was on the blacklist, Anthony.
Was he?
He was. He was married to one woman his entire life, a Mexican-American actress named Margot. Now, Margot was known for being a left-wing leaning actress, and she had some, she knew she wasn't communist herself, but she had associated with some people that were listed in the red channels, which listed communists and communist sympathizers.
Good old McCarthyism.
Yeah, so by virtue of their marriage, Eddie Albert got listed in the red channels along with his wife.
Now, what was his wife's name again? Sorry, John.
Margot. She went by her full...
Polo?
Margot.
Polo.
Margot.
Polo.
Oh, good Lord. I'm not even going to give you I'm not even going to give you Jesus Christ, because that one was bad. That was bad.
Either way, John, I understand your confusion.
Oh, Jesus. Anyway, moving on from Anthony's bad jokes.
We'll have to do something to save us from this roll of an episode, John.
I know. We're trying. We're trying,
folks.
So when the blacklist eventually ended, Eddie's career more or less survived, in part due to his war record. Unfortunately, Margot's did not, because she did not have the strong TV resume that he was able to get, and she didn't have the war record because, at the time, women weren't really actively serving in the military. So that is all I have on Eddie Albert. Anthony, do you have anything else on Eddie Albert?
Nope, just my little Spider-Man tidbit.
Which is appreciated. So, do you know who our victim is this week, Anthony?
Our victim this week, John, as I scroll down because I have it very much out of order, is John Kerr playing Colonel Dutton.
He's not in this episode all that much.
No, he's in it for like a whole 10 seconds. But he has a career spanning back all the way from 1953. Some of his notable hits that you may know him or may have seen him in was Gunsmoke, Adam 12, and The Streets of San Francisco, which he must have starred with co-star in this episode, Ron Castro, at some point.
Officer Sanchez?
Yeah, Officer Sanchez was also in The Streets of San Francisco.
Get out of here.
No, I would have mentioned that as soon as we brought up Officer Sanchez.
Oh, well, seeing as how I didn't really do any research on Officer Sanchez, I'm going to appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Because I honestly didn't think he was that big of a character to dive into.
And John, not only were they co-stars in this episode of Columbo, as well as The Streets of San Francisco, they also were co-stars in Adam 12. They both overlapped in that show as well.
That sounds about typical for Hollywood at this time of
of
the era. I have a couple things about John Kerr. It seems like most of his acclaim came from the stage. He got critical acclaim for playing a troubled prep school student in a play called Tea and Sympathy, which he also reprised in the film version of that play in 1956. He won the Tony and other prestigious stage awards for this performance. He did a couple films. There's two of note that caught my attention. One was a drama romance war film called Gabby, which was based on the 1930 play Waterloo Fields.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. The only reason I mention it is that coincidentally, in the 1931 pre-code version of that movie, because Gabby was the third adaptation of that play, John Kerr's grandfather was in the 1931 version.
No way.
Yeah, so a little bit of...
that's a nice little legacy play.
Little synchronicity there. He also was up for the part of Charles Lindbergh in a movie called The Spirit of St. Louis.
Which was the plane that Charles Lindbergh flew.
Yes. That in that movie, the part eventually went to James Stewart. Watch all this on.
Jimmy Stewart, ladies and gentlemen.
How did I get here? That's right, Zuzu. I'm on a podcast.
Well, what's a podcast?
What is this mechanical box?
Now, it's funny that you mentioned The Spirit of St. Louis, John.
Yes.
As I mentioned, was the plane that he flew out, Charles Lindbergh flew, but it was also the name of the American Basketball Association back in the 1970s when there was a rival to the NBA. That was also a team in St. Louis. They were literally called the Spirit of St. Louis. And Bob Costas covered that team.
Oh, I'll be. I don't have a Bob Costas impression, but if I did, I would use it.
I don't have one either, but I respect that man greatly.
Yes. Now, the reason John Kerr did not take the part of Charles Lindbergh is that Charles Lindbergh was a Nazi sympathizer, Anthony.
Yes. Yes, he was.
And I can quote John Kerr in saying he, quote, disagreed severely with the gentleman's political leanings, end quote. That might have been more of a paraphrase than anything else, but that was why John Kerr did not get that part. He did not want to play a Nazi sympathizer. End of his life, he was a lawyer. He left the industry for the most part. Picked up some small parts here and there from 1970. He tried directing, didn't take to it. Took the bar, went to law school and took the bar in 1970. Was a lawyer ever since, and just picked up a smattering of parts here and there as favors.
Well, good for him.
Now, Anthony, this episode is unique because in addition to our victim, we have some witnesses. Can you talk about these witnesses?
Yes, I would love to. The first and main witness of tonight's episode is Suzanne Pleshette is the actress's name, and she plays the witness Helen Stewart. Now, John.
Yes, Anthony.
Suzanne Pleshette starred in a plethora of TVs and movies dating all the way back to 1957.
That is correct.
A few of note that I would love to mention was Have Gun Will Travel, Route 66, which we talked about in last week's episode in great depth.
That keeps coming back up.
Absolutely. She also starred in the Wild Wild West TV show, not the 90s Will Smith vehicle. But
that was based on that TV show?
Yes, but there was an actual TV show back in around that time. And also, fun fact, she did some voice acting, John. She voiced Badwick's mom in the anime Trigun. Ooh. And she also, I may mispronounce this, but did some voice acting in Spirited Away. She played a Yubaba, which I believe was one of the I don't even know how to describe that character because I don't even know how to describe that movie.
I do have this note. She played the Witch Twins, Yubaba and Zeniba.
Yep, there you go.
In the Hayao Miyazaki film Spirited Away. So she's in the English dub.
Yes, in the English dub. I will keep my personal thoughts on that film and that director to myself.
Studio Ghibli is
an fine studio, John.
Fine studio. Fine studio. You just got to like some of them, not all of them. That's all I'm going to say on that.
And she also starred in Will and Grace, John.
Did she really?
Yeah, I don't have what character she starred in, but I know she starred in a few episodes of Will and Grace.
Now, I have a few things to add to your wonderful summary, Anthony.
Please.
So, most famously, I think, she was best known for her TV role in the Bob Newhart show as Bob Newhart's wife, Emily Hartley.
Huh.
But the Bob Newhart show was one of the famous sitcoms of the 70s.
Yes, it was. Great TV actor, great comedian, great skit actor even too.
Yes, Bob Newhart is one of the greatest comedic minds of probably the last 50 years. So she was in the original version of the Bob Newhart show way back when, and then in the revival of it, which was just called Newhart.
As opposed to the old show, Old Heart.
Yes, she was also in movies, Anthony.
Movies, you say?
Movies, I say. Her best-known film role was a part in Hitchcock's The Birds.
Oh, God. This movie was probably the main reason why I have a fear of birds to this day.
I think that's a very accurate statement for a lot of people in the world, Anthony, who have seen that movie.
Yes.
I myself am not terrified of birds, but I might need to rewatch that movie to become terrified of birds, so then we can be terrified of birds together.
But, John, what I can say is that movie was just for the birds.
Oh, God, file that. She was also, there's also one play that I'd like to mention. She succeeded Anne Bancroft as Anne Sullivan Macy in The Miracle Worker, the play about Helen Keller.
Ah, yes. Yes.
That's all I have for Suzanne Pleshette. Anthony, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Nope. I think I mentioned all the little fun facts that I have about Suzanne.
So at this point, I would like to go into the last bit of at least actor-wise research that I did. It sounds like you did a little bit more, but give me 1 second here.
As I'm filibustering for John as he goes into his notes, I would just like to say that we appreciate all of the fanfare that the Columbo Files has gotten. We ask that you, as always, subscribe, rate, review on any of the podcatchers of your choice. And John and I just, as always, want to thank you all for lounging with us.
We appreciate the effort and the love. Now, the other witness, I'm lumping her in as a witness, even though I would say based on the character, she is a very reluctant one. We have the mother of Suzanne Plechette's character, Helen. We have Mrs. Walters. We're never given a first name, I don't believe.
No, not that I recall.
Which makes sense for the time. It would just be like, if it's a formerly married older woman, they'll just refer to her by her married name, I suppose. But, that's just speculation on my part. So Kate Reid plays Mrs. Walters. She was a Canadian actress that was born in London.
Canadian, eh?
Oh, yeah. Don't you know? That's more this is a more Minnesotan over there. But then there's there's a Canadian. They go up to Tim Hortons up there and get some donuts. I don't know where this bit's going, but it's
Mountie John, everybody. Mountie John.
Mounties. Feeling content because this episode kind of sucks. On stage, she wasn't in the original adaptation of Death of a Salesman. She was in the 1985 TV adaptation of Death of a Salesman, where she played Linda Lohman, wife of main character Willie Lohman. She had a couple episodes on Dallas.
Yep.
I believe like a 6-episode run. And she also earned a Best Supporting Actress nomination for the 1980 romantic crime movie Atlantic City, which starred Burt Lancaster and Susan Sarandon.
Interesting. I never knew that.
The things you can find on the internet, my friend.
And speaking of things I found on the internet, John.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to mention about Miss Kate Reid was that she starred in Philip Marlowe Private Eye as character Anna Jeter, which was a adaptation of the novel, series of novels by Raymond Chandler. And most notably, Humphrey Bogart played Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep in the year 1946 alongside Lauren Bacall. And it's one of my favorite, not only Humphrey Bogart roles, not only noir movies, but just one of my favorite movies in all.
Now, Anthony, have you seen The Long Goodbye that has Elliot Gould as Marlowe?
I don't think so. Not that I recall.
I think you would dig it. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit off kilter. There's a very young Arnold Schwarzenegger in there as a young heavy.
Oh, what would that sound like in that movie?
Hello, this is a long hello, and now this is a long goodbye. Goodbye.
Perfect. That's all I needed from that. But what I do want to mention is I did see the remake. I think it was in the 1970s or 1980s, starring Robert Mitchum. I couldn't think of his name.
Thank God.
Robert Mitchum in the it was the 1970s adaptation of The Big Sleep. I did not care for this one at all.
I haven't seen it, so I'm going to take your word on it. So, well, I can go into the crew this week. We have one returning member so far. We have Gil Malay coming back on the music, and I must say it's a vast improvement than what we got in Deathlands at Hand. The score feels much more appropriate to the noir.
Now, John, I know you were mentioning Gil Malay coming back into this, but
Yes.
one thing I want to mention before we jump off of characters, I want to mention the little diner owner, Timothy Carey, who plays diner owner Bert in this. And I'm going to bring up Bert in a couple of instances, but I want to give him a shout out because not only was he pivotal for this moment, was he a shining star in this episode, but he also played as character roles in Starsky and Hutch, Charlie's Angels, Chips. Yes, that Chips with Mr. Estrada, East of Eden, The Great American Hero, which is again a callback to last week. And he also, in another callback from last week, Airwolf.
Oh my! Are you kidding me?
No, I am not, John.
We can't escape freaking Airwolf, man. Doesn't seem like it, but it's neither here nor there. So, Anthony, what do you think of the music this week?
The music was fine. It felt vanilla to me. It felt just kind of like it blended. There wasn't anything substantial that came out to me of note that I'm thinking of.
There's a couple moments where I thought it was really, really good. It's a vast improvement than what he gave us last time.
I will agree to that, yes.
But I would agree with the vanilla assessment. It's kind of just generic for, I think, the type of show that Columbo finds itself categorized with. Director-wise, we have a new director, Anthony.
Why, yes, we do. We have director Jack Smite.
Now, I wasn't able to find anything really of note here. Route 66 is on his resume, so Route 66 is back.
Another connection.
Again, which, Route 66 was one of the most popular shows at the time, so I'm not surprised, and I imagine we'll keep seeing it come up for a good period of the show. He also directed a number of Twilight Zone episodes, but none of the ones that he directed seem to be some of the really, really big famous ones. He did a total of 4. He also did a film, which I haven't seen, but it caught my attention mostly because I know the book. He directed an adaptation of the Ray Bradbury novel, The Illustrated Man.
Interesting.
Yes. So he did it maybe a little over half a dozen film pieces, but nothing really hit hard from what I could tell.
Okay. I guess that makes sense.
So our writer this week is John T. Duggan. And this is his first of 2 episodes, Anthony. So we're going to see him come back again.
And I would like to say something that's not a slight on Mr. John T. But John T. Duggan does not sound like an actual name. It sounds like an alias. It sounds as though it could be possibly an actor in some very specific role in some very specific adult films.
Well, funny that you mentioned an alias, Anthony, because he used an alias on occasion when writing some episodes. I don't have the exact name right in front of me, but I can look it up. But while I'm doing that, I can list what he was known to write for, which was a couple things, some of which he wrote for Bonanza. He wrote episodes of Mission Impossible, the original 60s show. He wrote on the show that was stolen from Bruce Lee, Kung Fu. He did a number of episodes on those. He wrote towards the end of his career, and I believe he wrote about a little over a dozen or so episodes of Little House on the Prairie, Anthony.
Oh.
He also did Adam 12, which,
of course,
we're not surprised because that's one of the big shows back then.
But personally, Adam 12 was fine, but I liked the first 11 Adams, if I'm going to be more particular.
Cheap jokes. He's got some cheap jokes. But more importantly, he wrote an episode of Star Trek, the original series, Anthony.
Ooh, which episode did you write, John?
under the pseudonym John Kingsbridge, which does sound like a porn name. He wrote the episode Return to Tomorrow, which is a season 2 Star Trek episode where the Enterprise is guided to a distant, long-dead world where survivors of an extremely ancient race existing only as disembodied energy, desiring the bodies of Kirk, Spock, an astrobiologist, and Mulhall so that they may live again. That was from IMDb.
Okay, I believe I remember that episode.
I do not.
Fair enough.
It's been a minute since I've gone through TOS, but yeah. So it's funny you mentioned his name sounding like a pseudonym because he did use pseudonyms.
That is quite funny. Now, you mentioned TOS, John, but one little description that I'd like to give this POS of an episode is that the description based on the DVD on Columbo is no body, no murder weapon, an unstable witness, and an accused war hero make for a tough case for Columbo.
Now, Anthony, I'm glad you mentioned tough case because while this was a tough episode for us to watch, it sounds like it was a tough episode to film. Now, apparently, Peter Falk was set to sit out this episode saying he was sick. Turns out he was lying.
Ooh.
Turns out, according to Columbo File and follow-up trivia on IMDb, Peter Falk used the sick excuse to sit out in protest because the TV studio, was backing out of a promise to let him direct. The studio was Universal. So according to Columbo File and IMDb, he felt they were reneging on the promise to let him direct. So he stormed off set, faking an illness. He came back only when Universal threatened to sue him. So he's filming under duress, essentially. And while he was out, when he came back, he found that they continued filming using a stand-in, and the crew refused to do reshoots with him.
Wow.
It gets better. So Suzanne Pleshette was friends with Peter Falk. Said she had known him since she was 14 and said he had behaved very badly. There's a YouTube clip that is provided on the Columbo File that can follow up. She didn't talk to him for a year after this. She was that mad at him. And Eddie Albert, who ostensibly, we can say based off his resume, is a TV legend. You know, he's there in the early days of TV. He's got a lot of big hits to his name. He may be an older style actor, but he's still one worthy of renown. According to Suzanne Pleshette, what she said, that Eddie Albert told Peter Falk, I always wanted to meet you. I always wanted to work with you, but you're a real asshole.
Wow. Whoa, John.
I know. This is a bombshell for Peter Falk, isn't it? Now, Peter Falk would get to direct an episode later on, but I think this is kind of a glimpse for you and I on a side of the man that we never really realized.
No doubt, John. Holy moly.
It sounds like he's got a little bit of a temper.
It does. And we're going to see how this negative swirling emotions and negative swirling communication that all of these players had, we're going to see how that turns out as we move on to Act Number 1.
So, Anthony, Act 1.
Yes, John, Act 1.
Act 1. We open with a nice little musical opening, and the music from Malay here seems a little bit more appropriate. It's a little bit more ominous.
Yes. I did like the panning shot of the boat on the water. It's a very beautiful sight. Reminding me of a nice painting.
I'm glad you brought up the opening shot, Anthony.
John, it's almost as if I'm setting him up for you to knock him out of the park.
And boy, I'm going to knock this mother right out of the park. And you can tell I'm frustrated with it because that shot is typical of a lot of shots in this darn episode where it is slow. It is slow. It is ponderous. It is dull.
I would even call it pompous.
Oh, God. It's just like slow setups just to get like an atmosphere, which you can do a whole lot faster. I mean, we open up on what we learn later is a marina.
Now, John.
Yes.
As we're talking about the shot, you know what it reminded me of? Talking about pompous, long flailing shots and all of that fun stuff. Do you ever remember the first Star Trek movie to come to
Oh,
theaters.
God.
I think it was just called like Star Trek, essentially.
You're talking about Star Trek, the motion picture.
Picture, yes, of course. And the first time you see the Enterprise, it's a beautiful shot. It's like ba 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 ba, and literally for the next 30 minutes, it's ba 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 ba, like a glory shot of the Enterprise. That's what this reminded me of.
Listeners, Anthony is not wrong. In that first Star Trek motion picture, there is essentially I don't think it's 30 minutes, but it is long and it feels like 30 minutes. A long establishing shot of the USS Enterprise. And boy, is Jack Smite here really leaning into that. Even though the Star Trek the motion picture won't come for another 8 years, if I recall correctly.
Yes, that is correct. Now, John, I felt, and it sounds like you're on the same mindset here, that John Smite, Mr. John T, should have smited this entire scene out of the picture.
Maybe not the whole scene, but he should have kind of rejiggered his approach.
Thank you for letting my pun stay in the without telling me to file it. I appreciate that.
Old Jackie boy here deserves it, as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, it's not to completely disparage him. There are some decent moments, but it's slow, it's ponderous, it's a lot of setup shots for a lot of slow things going on, a lot of boats. And I made a note later on. It's like a lot of shoe leather is getting worn down in this stuff.
Yes.
It's just a lot of establishing shots of people walking and just walking to places and walking from places. It's a little much. But, to give a summary of what we're looking at, we're looking at the setup to the murder. We open on the water in the marina, and we're following a boat. And then we move to a home, which, based off the very slow pan, we find it's the home of a very decorated war veteran.
And you know how we figured that part out, John?
How do we figure that part out, Anthony?
There is a pandering shot of many a guns, which is very odd. And then it zooms into this portrait of an older man looking to be in the service, very Napoleon Bonaparte-esque, if I do say so myself.
I have a question for you, and this is going to be something more of a discussion between the two of us on what kind of a man this Major General Martin Hollister is. What kind of man would get a Napoleon-style portrait of himself and frame it in his own house?
Well, I think it plays into the theme of this episode of pride, of vanity.
Yes.
So he is both of those things. And yet he is also a decorated war hero. So he can be both of those things in this mythos, in this episode. And that's how Columbo catches him. But that's not until later, John.
That is true. And you're also bringing up a good point that we as people contain multitudes. We can be one good thing and one bad thing and still be a whole thing.
Yep. It's the concept of and, John. And not to go too far into my field of study, but a lot of the times, many of people think black and white thinking, right? It's either this or that, good or evil. But yet they misinterpret that, and again, misinterpret the human nature that we can hold multiple truths at once, and the concept of and. So I can be a nice guy, and yet I can be a dick to Johnny T in this episode for directing it the way he did.
Or more appropriate example, Peter Falk can be a sweetheart of a bear man and also be a real dick on set.
Yep, exactly.
Moving on. Do you know who owns this house, by the way? The house that is General Hollister's?
No, I don't, John.
According to IMDb, and this could be wrong, apparently that house is owned by Peter Falk.
Interesting. Not surprising. But that just does that mean like he had that revolving bookcase installed?
Yes and no. Probably not. I think the interiors are a set, and I think that the exterior is Peter Falk's house.
Gotcha. Sorry, folks. That's a sneak peek behind the curtain of what we're going to talk about in just a few short minutes.
Yes. So we see General Hollister shaving with an electric razor, but it looks like a box.
I loved it, man. I saw that. I was like, yep, that's some nostalgia right there. A boxy old electric razor. I
know. Now, I think there was like a very nice music fake out when we hear, because a scene immediately prior, after the big long water jerk off.
Those normally cost extra.
I know. We see a military man pull up to General Hollister's house and buzz the door, and the music gets really ominous. So did you feel like they were going to do a fake out on us?
Knowing this episode already,
Yeah.
since I knew what was coming, I didn't get that sense of feeling.
Mhm.
What I will say is I could see the case for a fake out, especially since we don't know who this person is, as in the person shaving, this older man. We see that he has a portrait of himself, but we also see guns lying everywhere. And so you could be thinking that this is some, gun salesman or something of that nature, some arms dealer, and that he could be getting busted at this moment.
Well, he's not an arms dealer per se, but he is a construction man, which we learned from Colonel Dutton. I forget his first name. But
I think it's just referred to as Colonel Dutton, honestly.
Or Colonel Mark Dutton. I remember
possibly.
something like that. I'm just going to refer to him as Colonel Dutton. So we find out that Colonel Dutton is part of the Marine Materiel Office. So he is essentially, I think, a procurement guy. And he has been working with retired General Martin Hollister through Hollister's construction company. And it turns out they embezzling
Yes, they
from
are.
the government.
They are scraping off the top, John.
And apparently have been doing it for a while. And at this point, the Inspector General has decided we are going to do some investigating. And Dutton has now reached the point of freak out and is telling Hollister, we are about to get got. We need to get gone.
Yeah, he is essentially Colonel Dutton, that is, planning on fleeing the country to Geneva and advising the General Hollister to do the same.
And Hollister thinks he's not going to get caught.
No, not at all. He is being very arrogant. He's telling Colonel Dutton, well, look, just stick to the old lines of you'll be fine. This isn't like any other inspection. And Dutton is freaking out, as you should be, because this isn't just a normal stereotypical check, John. This is the Attorney General.
Exactly. And, it's going to be a full-fledged investigation. And there's not going to be any place they're going to hide once people start asking the hard questions. So Hollister comes to the conclusion that Dutton's not going to survive the hard questions, so he's going to take him out of the picture altogether.
Absolutely.
So we see the setup for the murder. We don't see the murder itself because we cut to the water again and a boat that we saw earlier. Now, Anthony, who's on this boat?
John, who is on this boat is one very... I liked her bandana hat that she was wearing, by the way. It was very stylish, very beautiful.
And matched her jacket.
And we were talking about Suzanne Pleshette, of course, as one Helen Stewart, also known as Mrs. Stewart throughout this episode.
So she sees the murder through the window of General Hollister's home, and then her jerk of a mother is immediately saying, "You saw nothing." And Helen takes the boat back to shore, and probably I think the first overtly comedic scene that we've gotten in Columbo.
Yeah, it was a very much slapstick scene where Helen can't really row this boat very well or steer this boat very well, so it's very shaky. Very, her mother is sitting there like jawing at her the entire time, and then doing the whole like, "Oh, thank God you took this boat while you could, because my daughter can't steer this boat worth a darn."
Yeah, so we go back to shore, and Helen hesitates when she gets to the phone booth, at which point her mother goads her again, saying, "Yeah, you thought better, didn't you, you idiot?" In so many words, which then leads Helen to make the call, and that's where we're introduced to Officer Sanchez.
Yes, who arrives on the scene, John, and it's Officer Sanchez and one of their officers. They're just looks like stereotypical beat cops, and they're questioning what they saw. They're taking down information. And then once they figure out that it's General Hollister's place, they make a call to their superior officer, John.
Agreed. And that superior officer is the good lieutenant.
Yep.
Funny enough, when I first saw this, I didn't know the background stuff about Peter Falk being a cranky pants on this episode. So I was wondering, did that conversation with Officer Sanchez and his immediate superior bringing in homicide, do you think that was meant to cover for the fact that they did not have Peter Falk?
100%, John. 100%. Now, when you drop that knowledge on me about Peter Falk acting the way he did for this particular episode, I can now understand and see why there was a lot of this filibustering in this particular shot.
And there's also a couple shots where you don't see Columbo head on. You just see him from the back. And there's a couple other instances where you see either Eddie Albert from behind, but it might not be Eddie Albert. And it also kind of impacts the episode a little bit, don't you think?
Yeah, it's very jumpy. It's very out of place at times, you can tell. And again, just leads me to my overall thought process of this being a very, very poor episode of Columbo, probably at the bottom 5 for sure.
Yeah, at this point at least.
At this point, yes.
Because I know there's one in particular that will hit the bottom of the barrel, but we will get there when we get there. So Columbo shows up to General Hollister's house, and Sanchez notes that nobody's come in or out except 2 cadets who are coming in to deal with this box that we saw earlier in the episode, which I thought was odd. Wouldn't the police make sure that nobody went inside, even if they're not 100% sure a crime did commit?
But the witness herself was very shaky.
Yeah.
And it is a home of a war hero, so I can see them bending the rules a little bit. And speaking of bending the rules, John?
Yes.
I want to talk about Columbo's interaction with Officer Sanchez before Columbo enters the house of said General Hollister.
Yes.
So what I would like to say and start off with is that he tells Officer Sanchez, I'm going to go see the general. While I'm doing that, I want you to inspect around the house, especially the backyard with a boat. And Officer Sanchez says, but sir, I don't have a warrant to do so.
Mm-hmm.
To which Columbo replies oh, I'm sure the general will be totally fine with it. And if he's not, I'll just get a warrant. It'll be fine. But in the meantime, you keep doing what you're doing and search what I tell you to search.
Yeah, that one felt really sketchy to me.
I quoted it as legal ambiguity, John.
It is absolutely ambiguous, but there's a little bit of room for it considering that it's plain view. The boat's just out in the open. You can touch it and see if it's warm or not, but
but John,
it's pushing it. It's really pushing it, and the ethics behind it.
And this is coming off our previous episode of Columbo Files. Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, where he also showed some of this same legal ambiguity that we were both not too keen on, that we talked about in depth. So coming off of that episode into this episode, you're like, oh, Columbo's really towing that line. And I would make the argument that it's putting his big toe across the naughty side.
Yeah, especially here where there's not a lot of support for it based off of a very already shaky witness testimony. Before we go on to the conversation that Columbo has with General Hollister, I want to know, how the heck did Sanchez know who that house belonged to?
Yeah, what I chalk that up to, John, is that Sanchez and his partner just look like regular beat cops. And the beat cops, essentially that term we're using as cops that patrol a particular area. And so I would imagine that they're very familiar with who lives where and what is where. And so that's, again, this being a war hero, someone of note, someone of fame, I think. And again, being the beat cops of the area, I think that's how I imagine how he knew that it's his place.
Okay, that's a rational explanation. I would also add to that, they needed to get that exposition out somehow, and Peter Falk wasn't there to do it.
Agreed. 100%.
So Columbo goes in to General Hollister's house, and these cadets are closing up this wooden crate, which we learn is filled with war memorabilia and weapons, which are just kind of loosely tossed in there, I guess.
Loosely tossed, but said he packed them particularly for the exhibit, which I found odd, but I think it was just an opening for another comedic moment.
Yeah, and the weapons don't have any ammunition or firing pins, so there's no real risk in transporting them that kind of loosely, but still.
Now, John, we kind of skipped over this part, but what exactly was General Hollister wearing in this scene?
Oh, he was dressed to the nines in a nice black tuxedo, Anthony.
A beautiful, beautiful tuxedo, a classic one. And I'm not
fits
talking
him
about
like a glove.
Fits him like a glove, and not of your stereotypical 1970s ruffle shirt underneath. This was a straight black tuxedo with a nicely pressed white starch shirt underneath. It was
clean,
classic, beautiful.
Yeah, you couldn't have asked for a better tux, better suit, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I kind of want to just talk about the feeling of this in general, because I feel like this is where Albert's performance is kind of the weakest, because it feels like he belongs in a completely different show here. He feels goofy.
I feel like, John, that both Peter Falk and both Mr. Albert there I feel like they were just cashing the check in the mail at that point.
Yeah, considering the background, I think both of them are just, and I think Albert is a little bit more there than Falk is, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing, as I was watching this episode, without knowing the background of what was going on with Peter Falk at the time, I kind of saw that performance of Columbo as he's not even sure that a crime's committed, but he has to do his due diligence and still investigate. So that's why he's kind of doing it half-heartedly.
Yeah, and another thing about this whole sequence, there's a lot of wide shots and a lot more shoe leather. And
a lot of walking over here and then walking to this area and now walking into this bedroom.
And then back over to that first area. We also get a conversation about a targeting pistol. Because, from everything Hollister's telling Columbo is that he's getting rid of all his war memorabilia. It's all going into a museum for his old alma mater. But he's keeping an old targeting pistol, an old lighter that he got from the war. We learn that he's an expert marksman. And we also get the explanation from Hollister as to what the witness might have seen.
Yes. And again, at this point, Columbo's not saying who the witness is, whom the witness is, what gender they are or anything like that. He's just saying a witness called saying that there was gunfire at this household. Not saying anyone was shot. He was just saying that there was gunfire seen in this household.
Yeah. And Hollister pushes because he wanted to know more about the witness. But
pushes very hard. It's not just like a casual, who said anything? But the way he pushed was funny, and this is where I think Columbo kind of had something forming in his mind, but not solid, because he still wasn't sure a crime was committed, where General Hollister essentially asked him, he's like, who said that they witnessed a murder in my house? And Columbo says, I didn't say anything about a murder, sir. I never said a murder was committed here.
Yeah, and I think that plus on, once we get to the next conversation that Columbo has with Helen, I think that's where the cusp of the idea that maybe there's something more afoul here than somebody is implying gets formed in Columbo's head.
So General Hollister is being very accommodating to Columbo. He's talking to Columbo. Columbo saying that a witness saw one man in a military suit get shot by another man in a bathrobe at this point, and to which, General Hollister is deflecting the entire time.
Yeah, and General Hollister says that he was both the man in the uniform and the man in the robe because at some point he felt nostalgic and put on his uniform, grabbed the targeting pistol, and tripped over the crate with the guns that he's donating, and that's what the witness supposedly saw. And I think at that note, Anthony, we've hit the end of this rope in Act 1. No?
Before we do, John.
I'm wrong. Oh, my goodness.
Before we do, one thing of note is that Columbo asked for, what he was doing that day, and General Hollister did mention that the boat was, he took his boat out, his yacht out into the yard, and so Columbo follows up with Officer Sanchez outside, and Officer Sanchez says, no, the boat was cold, like it hasn't been run all day.
Yeah, and it goes in line with what Hollister was saying, that he only ran it in the morning and was there for the rest of the day. So on that note, Anthony, I have nothing else to add to Act 1. Do you have anything else to add to Act 1?
Nope, I don't think I do, John.
So on that note, good folk, ladies and gentlemen and good listeners, we can move on to Act 2.
So, John, we are in Act number 2, and Act 2 begins where General Hollister, right after talking with Columbo and right after Columbo leaves with Officer Sanchez, Hollister decides to go to the marina where he asked the marina keeper, who rented out the boat to Helen and Helen's mother, who went sailing because it was an old friend of his, he believed, that was waving to him.
Now, Anthony, I have a question for you. Why make this effort? I don't get it.
Exactly.
Even with the explanation Columbo gives us later, I don't get it.
It makes little to no sense, because it's, if he is trying to play this facade that I'm this war hero and this could not have happened, then he shouldn't have checked in at all. He would just play out his normal day.
Yeah, and considering where we are when Columbo leaves him, there's literally nothing to connect him to anybody.
Literally nothing to connect him to any sort of gunfire. Columbo's maybe a little iffy on some of the details that was given, but he's like, well, look, I have nothing to go on, so why am I going to keep pressing? This felt like if he didn't do this checkup at the marina, General Hollister, that is, it felt like Columbo would just be like, okay, well, nothing happened. Let me move on to my next murder case.
Yeah, it's like maybe the conversation with Helen might have changed differently, but maybe wouldn't have changed his mind. You know, it's just like I was just trying to figure out, and I'm glad you had the same reactions. Like, why would he do this? There was no at this point. He's scot-free. He's off scot-free.
I literally wrote in my show notes, he obviously has to be guilty because who checks up on a call like that? Who just gathers all of this information? And by the way, shame on the marina owner and the boat renter outer guy, because that should be confidential.
It should be. I mean, maybe it's a mix of, of Hollister's status plus he's an old boatman, and maybe that there's a casual friendship there that explains it. But no, you're absolutely right. It's not something that should be just given freely like that, even to an old friend, especially, considering that guy, the marina owner knows that's a young woman. How the hell would an old dog like General Hollister know who she or her mother is?
Exactly. And we follow up this scene, John, to a very brief jump cut to Columbo going to the house where Helen is and Helen's mother is.
It looks like an apartment complex to me because we have that sequence with those people doing a barbecue or something.
Yeah, it definitely looked like a condo or an apartment of some kind, but a mightily big apartment, if I do say so myself.
I mean, it's almost a house. And also, can I say, is she drinking straight vodka? Because damn.
Boy, I did not see a chaser in there, nor anything to mix it with. It just looked like straight up vodka that, she spills a little bit of when the doorbell rings, and she gets the drop, and almost does a brush of her teeth with it, which was the weirdest thing I noted.
I think I didn't see that. I just saw her take a sip and then just hustle on over to the door with it. But
no, she spills a drop, and then the drop's on her finger, and she does the whole thing where you suck up the remaining liquid from your fingertip to your mouth to where it almost simulates you brushing your teeth with said substance.
Now, do you think that means that Helen is a functional alcoholic? Considering what we learn later, maybe.
Maybe, but I'd like to think not, because she does work with kids. She is a teacher of some kind, so I would like to think better of this young teacher than not.
Kids and animals.
Kids and animals, you are correct.
So we learn a couple things on this visit from by Columbo to Helen's home. We learned that Helen likes to do sculpture.
Yep, it's very therapeutic for her.
Yes, and she's been through some things that require her to get some therapy.
We learned that Helen's mother is a total jerk, and who just totally, which becomes a reoccurring joke of this show, asks for Columbo's identification just to scoff at him and say, you don't look like a policeman at all.
Yes, she's very skeptical that Columbo is actually who he claims to be, and is constantly insulting her daughter's intelligence throughout this conversation and subsequent conversations. Columbo starts, pressing Helen, asking, were you drinking? How's your eyesight? I need to know what you saw, and is trying to figure out if there's any possibility that maybe she did not see what she's claiming to see. But she stands very firm.
Yep.
Which I appreciated. So,
well, John, not only firm, she's very upset that Columbo's insinuating that, she could have even been drinking, that she didn't see what she saw.
She guzzles vodka.
Yes, as she's guzzling vodka down, talking about that. And so Columbo essentially says there's no evidence of a crime, and then he leaves the house, right?
Yes.
And then it almost in just about the next exact scene, and it feels like only 5 minutes later, Hollister shows up to the same apartment complex and soaks a sweet tale to Helen about how he wants her to watch the evening news to let her be a judge of character because he knows that she's the one that reported him as firing a gun in his room or his house, excuse me.
Do you think he was going, like, at any point, did you feel like he was going to find her to kill her? Not like, assuming you were seeing this for the first time, were you thinking that, oh, he's going to go kill her?
I didn't get that vibe, if I'm to be honest with you, but that is a very interesting theory, and you can kind of see that sinisternism of it, because again, it would explain why he's just being a creepy stalker to this person. But as soon as the door opens and she is a very attractive young lady, his tone changes, and he actually utters out a line something akin to, "Oh, I'm actually pleasantly surprised that it's you," because then he knows that he can try to beguile her and try to throw on some a little bit of honey, a little bit of sweet moves there, a little bit of flirtatiousness to try to convince her that he's not a bad guy.
Even though he's probably old enough to be her father.
I would even argue grandfather, just based off their looks.
Yeah. So there's an implied threat that he gives her, because he does like a very circular bit of dialogue about the fact that he knows she's the witness who claimed to see a shooting,
and then he really weird vibes, man.
Yeah, and then he tells her, you should pay attention to the news at 11:30. That's not anything a creepy person would say,
Exactly.
It's just and this is kind of consistent for a lot of his interaction with Suzanne Pleshette. It's just, and I don't think Eddie Albert is a creepy guy. He was probably a very nice gentleman, but they don't give him any favors in this one. And it's just and I understand that part of this is due to Falk being a stubborn jerk, and we get more of the relationship between the witness and the murderer here, but it's just icky.
Yeah.
It's icky.
And
man,
my thing is, if you're trying to keep this whole he's an innocent vibe about him, right? If you can kind of see someone being accused of murder or being accused of shooting showing up to who accused them out of, anger or something of the like and say, "No, how could you imagine that? I'm this war hero. Check me out on the news." And if that was the only interaction they had, John, I could kind of write off and be like, okay, he's playing off that he's an angry person who's getting accused of possibly murdering someone. I could get that. But we have a scene a little further down the road where he shows up to the witness again. And again, it just gives me such a creepy vibe on his character.
Yeah, and I can't comprehend a young woman at the time, and even now, not being like, "This is creepy. Get the hell away from me."
Yes, 100%, John.
I think it's clearly a sign that this was written by a man who didn't understand how a woman would work and be terrified by what Hollister does here, to be quite frank.
Yeah. And speaking of Frank, even though his name is Bert, John, we transition to a scene where Columbo's watching said news piece at Bert's Diner, even though I don't know if that's what it's called, but he's sitting there with a diner keeper named Bert as he's eating a bowl of chili, because Columbo's thing is he loves chili, so he's eating a bowl of chili and he's watching this newsreel footage of the heroics of the General Hollister.
Yes, and that whole piece is to set up the seduction, I guess, of Helen by Hollister, and everyone is now thinking, we mostly get this through Helen's mother, that there's no way a war hero would do anything untoward towards somebody, so you have to be hallucinating something, or you did not see what you thought you saw.
And we're getting this dialogue, John, because again, speaking of how poorly this was shot and directed, again, not knowing the background stuff that you mentioned earlier about Peter Falk, but it's a cut scene between Bert and Columbo, and then jumps to Helen and her mother, then back to Bert and Columbo, to just back and forth, and it's just kind of mind-boggling, honestly.
Like, I have a note here that I wanted to just to remind myself as a piece for discussion. Do you feel like this whole sequence with this news piece, is it good or bad exposition? Because I feel like it's leaning towards bad, but it's somewhere in the middle, based off the circumstances behind this episode. Take your time. Think about it. Mull with it.
Rephrase it a little bit for me.
So do you feel that this sequence works with the news piece? Try to give background as to
I think
what his character is.
I think it does, from the aspect that Columbo's ears perk up regarding the pistol, his famous pistol. So it works from that aspect, but I think it could have been done better if we just cut out the scene with Helen and her mom and just made it Columbo and Bert watching the news.
Mm-hmm. And then cut to that interaction between Helen and Hollister later on, where he confronts her, and then you can just have it in dialogue saying, yes, I saw it, and then go from there.
Yeah, exactly.
So post this news piece, though, Anthony, we find out what actually happened to Colonel Dutton. He wasn't dumped off the yacht as around the time Columbo originally thought. He wasn't, hidden in the crate of war memorabilia. He was literally hung on a gun rack.
Yes, but it's hung on a gun rack that is triggered by a hidden compartment button that flips an entire bookcase to rotate around, which was an amazing concept in itself. But this is where the score and the scene directing, John, that I want to touch on was actually really good, because it was a very ominous, sinister reveal of the body being there. Like, it gave me a little bit of chills, I'm not going to lie.
No, I agree. I do feel, though, that it starts strong, ends weak, because it goes more into slow shots of a boat leaving a harbor.
Yes.
And then it leads into long, slow shots of a boat coming back into that harbor, which we come on to, I think, my personal favorite scene, because you actually get a little bit of heat in this one. Not Al Pacino heat, mind you, but here is where Columbo first, his revisit to General Hollister, and Columbo, as always, it's these little things, they bother me. I can't let them go. They bother me. So he's come to ask Martin Hollister. It's just like, I saw your news piece. I just wanted to know what happened to that famous gun. It's quite of a hallmark of your career. Something along those lines. So, Columbo calls it a loose end. And this is following Columbo wondering, why is Hollister coming back in when everybody is finally is just starting to go out to fish?
Exactly.
So that's one loose end. The other loose end is, where's the pearl-handled revolver? Because part of the news piece said that, like General Patton, Hollister was noted for carrying a particular type of Colt 45, a pearl-handled gun. According to Hollister, that was stolen in Korea after his injury.
And he was thankful that it was stolen, John, because it became a part of his legacy that he didn't like, or something. He spun, essentially.
Now, what I loved in this scene is that there is a great amount of tension between Albert and Falk here. There's a lot of, indirect but direct phrasing about fishing and bait, and Columbo's lack of bait.
Yeah. I even have the line quoted as the scene ends, where Hollister to Columbo states, "So, Columbo, you need to find a different spot or use different bait, because you're not going to catch anything, Lieutenant, the way you're doing it currently," or something to that degree. And
the way Albert delivers that is just a perfect jab to the kidneys,
Yep.
And I can't help but think that he let a little bit of his frustration at Peter Falk, dig in a little bit. It's just like, you little snot.
Yeah.
How dare you come at me like this?
Exactly.
And from there we get more shoe leather to the Ark Park, which is where we find Helen working with animals, and we have Hollister awkwardly asking her out.
Yeah, again, this is the scene I was talking about earlier, loyal listeners, where I was saying, like, if the only interaction they had was just that opening where he shows up to her house and says, "Check the news, I'm actually a war hero," I could have let it pass, but he shows up to her place of employment that he got because he showed up to her apartment again and got the place of employment from her mother, and just shows up and invites her to a drink after work because he knows that in like an hour she's getting off. So again, just creepy stalker.
It doesn't, I don't buy any of this romance nonsense. I buy Eddie Albert as a military man. I can't buy him as an adversary. It just something feels off and creepy, and maybe it's just because they had to focus on this part of the episode rather than the proper investigation of Columbo. It's just, I can't. Hollister is kind of just a wet fart of a character. This seduction romance is just a stalker bit, and you would not get away with, this would become, I think if you tried to do something like this now, it would be a good bit of, tension, because you could play up the fact that, oh yeah, he's being a stalker, and you can add some really good tension and, make it so that it turns from being, him seducing her to him trying to forcibly convince her, I am good, I want you in my life,
Yeah, it just, again, like you said, it just doesn't hit well with me. And he's at this dinner with her, and he's laying on his charm and laying it on thick for her. And at first, she calls him out on it. She goes, okay, this is kind of weird that you're showing up. All of a sudden, now you're taking an interest to me romantically when I witnessed you shooting someone. And he's like, yeah, you're right. I can see how you think that, but I'm actually am falling for you. And gives her puppy dog eyes, essentially.
Which, would be like, thank you, Grandpa. It's time to take you home now.
Where it should have been, yes, but instead turns to more of the romantic angle for it.
So, and then it cut. I think it's a pretty awkward cut back to Helen's house, right? Because we go back to Columbo talking with her mother, who is being an outright ass, if I do say so myself. Because she literally states, if her daughter had just ignored some of her husband's flirtations with other women, she would still be married.
Yeah, as she is saying this, Columbo's like, oh, well, where's your husband? And she's like, oh, well, I had him go. It was a line that actually made me laugh out loud, I'm not going to lie to you. But she goes, oh, he went out for Chinese food 30 years ago and never came back. And that didn't make me laugh, I'm not going to lie.
I mean, based on how this woman is as a person, I'm surprised he didn't go out for Chinese sooner.
Yeah, fair enough. She was not a very nice person.
She's just not pleasant.
But John,
yes,
Helen does come back as Columbo and her mother are talking, and Columbo is interested to note that she went on a date with General Hollister.
Yes, and he notes that the police found Dutton's car while it was stolen and hot ridden for a joyride, and then proceeds to tell Helen and us that Dutton was a member of the military in the materiel department. He had just taken leave. He worked with Hollister a lot. He never showed up for his flight.
Yep.
And so, something is amiss. There's no, the only connection between him and Hollister is Helen.
Yep.
But Helen is starting to doubt, which is the...
Oh, yeah.
And
she's starting to doubt. She's starting to fall, quote unquote, fall in love with this man, this war hero. And that's when Columbo is learning that not only is Hollister wooing her, but he actually has a good conversation with Helen and says, you, ma'am, are downgrading yourself because you're showing these doubts. At first, you were very sure of what you saw. You were 100% sure when I was doubting you, but now you're just degrading yourself.
Especially when we come to the next scene where it is her sleeping on his yacht, and then he creepily just walks up, and it was just missing a very breathy hi.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
And all of this, time on his yacht was just set up for Hollister to show the front of his home with the sun glaring at it to further convince Helen, you made it up.
Yeah, convince her that, look, it's the same time that you claimed you saw it, And it's the same spot you claimed you saw. And look, there's a sun beaming off of the water. And then it has this weird zoom shot on Helen and like this weird orchestral score of like, ba-da. It reminded me of the loser game show sound from Price is Right. It's like, da-da-da-da, it was odd choice. Very odd choice.
It was, and what's even odder is the whining and the dining inside of Hollister's home, where it's got a candlelit dinner, and he wants to start dancing, and she can't dance, and it leads to the kiss, which is the most grandfather at a wedding kiss you can imagine.
Yeah, it was not great of an ending to this scene. But what is great, John,
what is that, Anthony?
Is that we're going to come to Act 3 and how Columbo gets it. So, John, Act 3 opens up with Colonel Dutton's body surfacing.
And I got to say, this was a very effective scene.
It really was.
And I don't know if that woman was, just somebody who was there or an actor, a proper actor, but man.
She sold that scene.
She sold it, and that's honestly what amplifies the scene. It is a genuine reaction of terror when she sees that body.
Not only was her reaction genuine, and in my head canon that person was not told that this was going to happen, so it was just a genuine shock value recording of her. To my knowledge, to my remembrance, there was not much of a score either, so it was just a silent body floating up to the water and her screaming.
I'm inclined to agree. I feel my memory, and I just watched this not too long ago, was that that there was a little bit of music, but
it was very light, if at all.
They were keeping the focus on that reaction, which honestly in that scene is the meat of that scene and what makes it effective. So you would do as much as you could to make sure that it is supported, not taken away from.
Exactly. And so from there, we get a shot of Hollister at his place on his yacht getting a radio update that the body of Colonel Dutton was found. And yet, of course, as soon as he hears it, he looks up and sees Columbo approaching the marina wanting to talk to him.
And Columbo is invited onto the yacht. And, because I'm guessing Hollister is more like thinking, I don't want to deal with him. But at least on his terms, so I'll put him on my terms. So he invites Columbo onto the yacht for a leisurely, sail around the marina.
Now, John, does this remind you of another particular scene from possibly a former Columbo episode, possibly the second pilot that we talked about 2 episodes ago?
You mean where Lee Grant makes Columbo almost fill his shorts?
Yes, exactly. Winner. Very much the same vibes, John, from the episode entitled Ransom for a Dead Man, in which Lee Grant gets Columbo in her airplane and tries to throw him off his game so that she can feel this position of power and throw him off his game to where he's not asking very probing questions about the murder.
Yeah, but here it's not as effective as what that plane flight was with Lee Grant. I feel like, and maybe you felt like this too, but this was my thought. I felt like the way Hollister was reacting was just like, what? He's dead? Oh, I didn't know. It was very much like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar trying to deny that he was in the cookie jar, but he's got the crumbs all over his face.
I have to just disagree with you on that, John. I think it's more so that him getting just super short with Columbo, very angry with Columbo, going, that has nothing to do with me. What do you mean? I haven't seen this guy. So what? You have no corroborating proof that, him and I were in business embezzling or anything like that. He's just very angry, very short. And even just the point where he's mocking Columbo for getting seasick. With a name like Columbo, Lieutenant, you shouldn't be as seasick as you are.
Yeah. So, and you got a point. They may be, a connection between the two because they did do business, but there's no way to establish that Dutton was at Hollister's house. That's where the weak spot is. So as much as Columbo can assume that maybe there's a possibility that he had motive to kill Dutton because of the federal investigation, there's no way to prove that Dutton was even there. And he gets Columbo in that little pin where it's just like, did you check the registration of the car that, Dutton supposedly had parked in front of my house? And Columbo straight up says, well, no, it didn't seem relevant at the time. So
exactly.
he's literally like, at this point, so I see what you're saying. I feel like I'm partially right in some instances because or at least I feel like I am, because there's certain moments in the dialogue where it does seem like he's going, well, no, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. But it's like you can imply the guilt in it, I guess, or the shame in it. Maybe I'm using the wrong words, but we go back to the marina where we see the back of Eddie Albert's doubles head, because I'm convinced that the person docking the boat is not Eddie Albert.
It's very possible, John.
So we find that Helen is waiting for General Hollister on the marina dock by his house, and Columbo mentions that the only connection between him and Colonel Dutton is her. And she is. Oh, I'm sorry, Anthony, by all means.
I was going to say, and at that point, Columbo starts to tell Helen about the body, and Helen is deeper in her denial, noting that she refutes anything that she saw, and it was just a mistake. It was the sun, showing Columbo that she has fallen under the guise of whatever General Hollister was throwing it down on her.
No, I agree. She's gotten to the point now where the seduction is more or less complete, and where it goes from there, I mean, I don't know. In terms of what it means for Hollister and Helen, at least. We from the marina we go back to Bert's though. And,
absolutely. Now, loyal listeners and John alike, when I was talking about Bert earlier, when I was talking about the cast and crew and giving a background, the reason I brought up Bert was because, A, his performance in this is a very shining, bright spot in this dull, droll episode. But Bert also, at this moment, and this conversation he has with Columbo, is comes in clutch, I should say, and comes up with the idea that sparks Columbo actually catching Hollister.
And I have that quoted because the circumstance is that Bert served in the military during the Korean War.
And World War II.
Oh, World War II.
He was in the Pacific.
Yes, I was mixing up him and Hollister because Hollister at one point mentions that he lost his revolver in Korea. So Bert served in World War II and had brought his war memorabilia from his house because his wife said you had to throw it out. It's either me, it's that or me. And Bert makes a very wise statement. It's like, he says, I can't give anything away, especially when it means something to you.
Yeah.
And that's what gets Columbo rolling.
It gets him rolling because, again, thinking back to the conversation he had with General Hollister about his pistol, his well-renowned, the linchpin to his legacy, you could argue, it just mysteriously vanishing. It just doesn't sit right with Columbo. It didn't back then, but now seeing this proof of another veteran of the same war and how he's keeping, Japanese stirring spoons and all of these other things, that's when it really, clicks with Columbo. He runs to the payphone in the diner, asks Bert for a dime, and begins to call Helen.
Yes, and he invites Helen to join him at the memorial exhibit for General Hollister's career, which we are given another long shot and a lot more shoe leather. Thank God it's the last round of shoe leather. And he, there's a criteria that Helen gives. Like, there's no questions. Columbo is very limited on what he can do because at this point, she is convinced of General Hollister's innocence, and he just starts describing, what a man like General Hollister would be. He's cool, he's calm. For somebody who had such a long career in the military, he had to be. There's no way a war hero like that could, act any other way.
And he's also talking up how vain he is. He's bringing up the general's pride and what all of that looks like. Going back to the uniform, saying they're a little bit too nice. It's all a little bit too showy.
And to which Helen replies to Columbo, well, not everybody wants to look like an unmade bed. Which, that stung.
It did. And you can see Columbo like taking that, like wincing from that comment. He like grabs his tie and like slowly straightens it. It was that particular scene was a good scene.
Yes, and we come to the supposed replica of the famous cult,
yes,
belonging to Martin Hollister, and we find General Hollister himself because we learn that, of course, Helen told him that Columbo called. And now they're going to have a nice confrontation. Presumably from Hollister's perspective, it's going to be the last straw, and he'll never see Columbo again.
Which is to some degree, but
yeah,
not what he was thinking.
No. So Columbo makes a very compelling argument that, like you said, Anthony, the vanity of the man and the pinpoint nature of this gun in that particular man's legacy would mean that no man that vain and that so concerned with his legacy and his history and his pride would let that gun be stolen. There's no way. Absolutely no way. A normal person, like you or me or Helen or Columbo, they would take the gun, use it, and the moment that it's getting to the point where it's either they keep it and run the risk of getting caught or get rid of it and then maybe have a greater chance of getting away with whatever the crime is. Columbo says because of the vanity and pride that this man has, he kept it. It's a fabricated story. There was no theft in Korea. There's no duplicate. This is the original. And if they run the ballistics, they will see that it matches the bullet that is in Colonel Dutton.
And that's what that's what General Hollister says to Columbo. Instead of refuting or saying, no, I couldn't have done this, he asked, I'm assuming ballistics already ran prints and everything on this gun.
Which is why I assume that case is unlocked.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I've been to a couple museums in my time. Usually those things are locked.
Yeah, exactly. And then as soon as he said that, Columbo makes a motion, and two, detective extras come running down to escort the general away. But before they escort him away, the general turns to Helen and says, "I'm so sorry."
To which I really feel bad for her in this scene, because it's just like, she's had such rotten luck with between a cheating husband, an absent father, a verbally abusive mother, exactly. And then what seems to be, even though he's stalkerish, he seems nice enough, I guess, outside of the stalker stuff. But maybe that's just the nature of
it's hard to pass that stalker stuff, man. Like, it was coming on thick.
Yeah, I mean, and that's us commenting from the outside in, but from her perspective, it seems like she's just being beat on and has the worst kind of luck.
But the episode and this particular scene does end on a high note with Columbo taking her under his arm as she's crying and just brutally heartbroken and saying, well, no, you see, my niece who got a divorce, she bounced right back up, is now dating a cop, and they are married to a cop. Now they have 5 kids, and trying to be this nice Columbo figure that we know and have seen.
I do appreciate, though, that she calls him out and says, do you really have a niece? And he just goes, yes, of course I do.
The question is that. Of course I do.
It's my wife's sister's daughter, Cynthia. What are you talking about?
Now, John.
Yes, Anthony. But I have one little thing that there's a difference in how the camera is focused on her in the conversation with Columbo and how it is on Peter Falk. I think we have another instance of, Peter Falk's not in that scene. And they need to zoom in.
Possibly. Yeah, definitely. Now, as we come to a conclusion of this episode, John, it seems as though we're coming to a conclusion of this podcast. And it's time
for just one more thing.
I'm so sorry to bother you. Just one more thing.
So, Anthony.
Yes.
What's your one more thing? What's your final thoughts? Give it to me.
Well, my final thoughts, John, of this particular episode, the first one that is a theme of this episode as we're recording that we've already touched upon on multiple instances is that this is not my favorite episode at all. Definitely bottom 5 at that.
Yeah, it is. It's a clunker a little bit. It is. I think Suzanne Pleshette is like one of the highlights of the episode. I think she gives a very consistent performance.
Exactly. And you know who else gives a good performance, John, and is another highlight and is another final thought for me is good old Bert. Good old Bert saving the day, cracking the case wide open, serving chili, slopping it on there, talking about good old war stories with Columbo.
And I think, the character actors like the actor who portrayed Bert, they are an underappreciated breed in Hollywood. It's like they are actors who can just embody a certain type of person and you just buy it. And, he feels convincing. And I think that's part of what makes him so effective in this episode. It's like he is the kind old diner owner who can give you the occasional good word of advice every so now and then while, showing off his chili skills.
Which is a testament, John, to character actor Timothy Carey.
Thank you, Anthony. But I think Eddie Albert is, and I think you're in agreement with this, he's fine, but the material from a modern perspective and from a then perspective is not good. Even considering the fact that everybody was super frustrated with what was going on behind the scenes with Universal and Peter Falk. I think even if Peter Falk was in the saddle, as it were, I don't think it would really save this episode that much.
Yeah, again, we talked about it being a clunker of an episode. Some shining parts some good parts for Mr. Albert, for sure. Eddie Albert, that is. Good moments here and there. However, all the way around, I felt like that maybe wasn't a failure on his part. It was just the writing and just the frustrations behind the scene. I feel like this is an episode that had rewrites on top of rewrites on top of things getting handed to him.
It must have. I mean, we both used Columbo File among other resources to try and figure out what exactly might have happened, but we can only assume about the rewrites. It sounds likely based off of the fact that they didn't have their star and they only had so much time to work with. So, it was bound to happen at some point. It's going to happen again, but it's just, unfortunately, we found dead weight.
Which, John, is a great way to segue for us to say thank you all for taking the time out of your busy and important lives to listen to another episode of the Columbo Files. We appreciate all the feedback, any and all feedback. We appreciate that you download, rate, and subscribe. Now, John, send us out onto the lovely sunset to which only you can do.
Good listeners, gentle folk, I have been John Soares. On behalf of Antonicus Gluteus Maximus IV himself, thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Peter Falk, and you've been listening to an episode of the Columbo Files, hosted by the Ludic Lounge. And just one more thing. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Ludic Lounge Anthony at RojoLoco44, and John at just_John_08991. Or feel free to email us at theludiclounge@gmail.com.